Welcome to our continuing series, Questions and Answers, from the works of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Today, Delight, Part 3, from Sri Aurobindo. This primary, ultimate, and eternal existence, as seen by the Vedantins, is not merely bare existence, or a conscious existence whose consciousness is crude force or power. It is a conscious existence, the very term of whose being, the very term of whose consciousness is bliss. As in absolute existence, there can be no nothingness, no night of inconscience, no deficiency, that is to say, no failure of force, for if there were any of these things, it would not be absolute. So also there can be no suffering, no negation of delight. Absoluteness of conscious existence is illimitable bliss of conscious existence. The two are only different phrases for the same thing. All illimitableness, all infinity, all absoluteness is pure delight. Even our relative humanity has this experience, that all dissatisfaction means a limit, an obstacle. Satisfaction comes by realization of something withheld, by the surpassing of the limit, the overcoming of the obstacle. This is because our original being is the absolute in full possession of its infinite and illimitable self-consciousness and self-power, a self-possession whose other name is self-delight. And in proportion as the relative touches upon that self-possession, it moves towards satisfaction, touches delight. The self-delight of Brahman is not limited, however, by the still and motionless possession of its absolute self-being. Just as its force of consciousness is capable of throwing itself into forms infinitely and with an endless variation, so also its self-delight is capable of movement, of variation, of reveling in that infinite flux and mutability of itself, represented by numberless teeming universes. To loose forth and enjoy this infinite movement and variation of its self-delight is the object of its extensive or creative play of force. In other words, that which has thrown itself out into forms is a triune existence consciousness bliss, Satchidananda, whose consciousness is in its nature a creative, or rather a self-expressive force, capable of infinite variation in phenomenon and form of its self-conscious being, and endlessly enjoying the delight of that variation. It follows that all things that exist are what they are as terms of that existence, terms of that conscious force, terms of that delight of being. Just as we find all things to be mutable forms of one immutable being, finite results of one infinite force, so we shall find that all things are variable self-expression of one invariable and all-embracing delight of self-existence. In everything that is dwells the force, conscious force. And it exists and is what it is by virtue of that force, conscious force. So also in everything that is there is the delight of existence, and it exists and is what it is by virtue of that delight. This ancient Vedantic theory of cosmic origin is immediately confronted in the human mind by two powerful contradictions: the emotional and sensational consciousness of pain, and the ethical problem of evil. For if the world be an expression of Satchidananda, not only of existence that is conscious force, for that can easily be admitted, but of existence that is also infinite self-delight, how are we to account for the universal presence of grief, of suffering, of pain? For this world appears to us rather as a world of suffering than as a world of the delight of existence. Certainly, that view of the world is an exaggeration, an error of perspective. If we regard it dispassionately and with a sole view to accurate and unemotional appreciation, we shall find that the sum of the pleasure of existence far exceeds the sum of the pain of existence. Appearances and individual cases to the contrary notwithstanding, and that the active or passive, surface or underlying pleasure of existence is the normal state of nature, pain a contrary occurrence, temporarily suspending or overlaying that normal state. But for that very reason, the lesser sum of pain affects us more intensely, and often looms larger than the greater sum of pleasure, precisely because the latter is normal. We do not treasure it, hardly even observe it, unless it intensifies into some acuter form of itself, into a wave of happiness, a crest of joy or ecstasy. It is these things that we call delight and seek, and the normal satisfaction of existence, which is always there, regardless of event and particular cause or object, affects us as something neutral, which is neither pleasure nor pain. It is there, a great practical fact, for without it there would not be the universal and overpowering instinct of self-preservation. But it is not what we seek, and therefore we do not enter into our balance of emotional and sensational profit and loss. In that balance, we enter only positive pleasures on one side, and discomfort and pain on the other. Pain affects us more intensely because it is abnormal to our being, contrary to our natural tendency, and is experienced as an outrage on our existence, an offense, an external attack on what we are and seek to be. Namaste.